My name's Denise Faustman. I'm the director of the Immunobiology Labs here at Mass General Hospital and Harvard Med School. And of course, one of the big projects we've worked on for the last 20 years is new indications for the BCG vaccine, or things called the off-target indications that have nothing to do with tuberculosis. And we have a guest here today, and our guest is Kumar Menon, and he is the president and CEO of Open Source Pharma. And we thought it'd be really fun to open one of the first podcast sessions on his view of the BCG vaccine as being cost affordable for healthcare, and share his views on his company. So maybe the first thing we should do is ask you, tell us what Open Source Pharma is and why you decided to start Open Source Pharma.
Absolutely, Denise. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for organizing this. Thank you also, Russell, for putting this together. Um, by way of introduction, I'm not a fancy scientist. I'm not a scientist at all. I'm just a regular human being. And so in that, maybe I have something in common with some of your listeners, Denise. I'm a human rights lawyer and interested these days in the human right to health. All people, say the Human Rights Treaty, should have a right to an attainable standard of health and health care. And so to kind of quote the Gettysburg Address or to draw from it, it's open source pharma is medicine by the people, of the people, and for the people. And we want to make sure that idea does not perish from the earth. He was one of my favorite presidents. So the purpose of open source pharma is to discover drugs and to develop an open source pharma ecosystem. And the idea behind it is that medicines are scarce, they're expensive for many diseases. In countries rich and poor, they're non-existent. And the way that we discover them is very, very expensive and very time consuming. And when it costs $2 billion to develop a drug, many conditions go neglected. So we're focusing on the vast needs that human beings have. Millions of people in the US, billions across the world for medicines that are affordable, safe, evidence-based, and that work. And so that's our basis. It's sort of to discover drugs and a new way to discover drugs. And the open source idea, very simply, is drawn from software. And it's about the idea of sharing and transparency and big data and advanced computation. And so we're very de rigueur in that sense.
Great, great. So I kind of like the idea of open source because historically, as you know, BCG was invented or developed at the Pasteur Institute over 100 years ago. And as soon as they got a stable line of this vaccine, obviously developed first for tuberculosis, they shared the strain with the world because nobody ever thought it would be valuable for anything else. It's still the only vaccine for tuberculosis. So the two parallels are wonderful. And it's great that the Pasteur Institute during the development did share the strain. But one of the things that comes up all the time as we think about new effects of the BCG vaccine is because everybody shared it, everybody grew it, everybody's been growing it for like 100 years. So gradually there's been data, mostly from human clinical trials, but also culture data from many people, that some of these strains aren't exactly the same. And that's not surprising after 100 years of culture. So do you want to talk a little bit about strain differences in the BCG vaccine or the BCG strains people are using
Sure, I'll do
today?
that. And I'll commence with your first point, which is so true. I mean, the BCG vaccine distribution around the world is an early example of open source thinking in pharma. They said, we don't own it. Everybody can grow it. We're going to supply it to everybody. It's going to be low cost. It's going to be open IP. And because of that, science is built on the shoulders of giants. It's based on the concept of sharing. And so when you kind of hoard, scientific advances don't occur. It's open source is really, we contend, is at the very heart of science. So that was a wonderful example of, decades ago, them shipping it all over the world. And that prefigured in a way the reason why we had responses to COVID was that the sequenced genome of COVID was made open and everybody could work on it. And so there's a very famous saying in open source software, with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow. And so here you had this distributed all over the world and everybody can look at it. And the strains, over time became a little bit different. And some of them with a little bit more, effectiveness than others, and we can draw on that. And one great thing about open source in pharma is if you're a regular pharma company, and we're a nonprofit, by the way, you work on the thing that you discovered, that you invented, that you have hold the IP to, so you only have your own studies. But here, we kind of crowdsource and aggregate all these studies that have been done all over the world of people looking at similar strains or the similar, vaccine, and you can have that collective knowledge. It's the collective heritage of all humankind to draw from international law. And so these strains are super important, and I think people like you know which strains very well, which strains have which qualities and which can be used for which purposes.
Hmm. Yeah, we've learned some hard lessons. I mean, in our field of diabetes, it's amazing we ever started thinking about clinical trials with BCG because there were kind of some confusing studies in diabetes, which is the off-target effect we work on. Early on, people did studies in Israel, and they thought they saw an effect of a BCG vaccine. And then the US and France and Canada did some studies and nuance at diabetics. Like, oh, that's bullshit. There is nothing there. And when you go back and you look at that data, the three subsequent studies had used TICE BCG, which we now know doesn't even work in the mouse models of autoimmunity. So big strain differences have evolved, at least for the off-target effects. Some people in the bladder field, the other indication, go, well, they're not so significant. But remember, in bladder cancer, where you're giving massive amounts of the drug. So you can maybe overcome those strain effects with massive amounts of drug. But if you're using it as a vaccine format, you're probably not going to overcome those strain differences.
Yeah.
So these became really important, as you know, because one of the well-documented off-target effects of BCG is platform infectious disease protection. And a lot of work from Europe and Africa had supported that. So when COVID hit, everybody ran out to do COVID clinical trials. So do you want to talk about those a little bit, both with respect to strain and the patients that were recruited?
Yeah, I remember this vividly, right? I was sitting in my apartment in New York, which was at the time the, epicenter, one of the epicenters of COVID, after Milan, et cetera, and China. And we had been working in tuberculosis for a very long time, and so we were familiar with BCG, although we hadn't worked on it. And tuberculosis is a respiratory infection, and we thought, gosh, I mean, here we are in humanitarian drug discovery. Should we try and do something about COVID? And all of our advisors said, well, tuberculosis, that's fine. It's a disease of the poor, tropical, neglected. No big companies working on it. This one, we got this covered. The big boys are playing. You can sit this one out. And so we thought, well, maybe. But we also thought the open idea, the fairness idea would be important. And then one of our advisors mentioned BCG to me, and I'll never forget it. I was stunned. He said, um, this is a very distinguished person. His name may rest in peace, Tachi Yamada. He was the head of R&D for two big pharmas, for GlaxoSmithKline and then Takeda. And he said, what about BCG for COVID? And I said, what do you mean? It's a vaccine. It works for one disease. And he said, nope, 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 nope. And that was the beginning of my journey. And it was, he was very credible. So I took it seriously. And I learned the history, as you said. I mean, it's been used for decades, and decades of clinical trials in Africa and then in Europe, showing that it works against many diseases at once. And if it works against many diseases at once, then maybe it might work against COVID. And one of the powerful examples that you mentioned, and this is when people are new to this, they still don't understand, they want proof. Well, BCG is FDA approved for bladder cancer. It's an immunotherapy. Cancer is driven in part by the immune system. That's how it works. It's marketed by Merck. I mean, it's as conservative and as evidenced as can be. So this wonderful vaccine, a fruit of creation of 100 years old, open IP, works for many diseases at once. And we thought this is an emergency, and there's nothing else ready. And Tachi said, look, it costs 10 cents a dose. It's been given to billions of people, and everyone has access to it, and it's ready now. And we thought, gosh, this is worth exploring. If we can change the course of a pandemic, we change the course of human history.
Mm-hmm. Well, how did it come out though?
Well, it was a titanic battle. So we thought, um, our advisors said, well, just go to the big foundations, which I won't name, and go to the big governments, which I won't name, and they'll take it up and it'll work. Um, they they didn't really take it up. And we always wondered why, because the evidence was there. I don't think there's any dispute about the evidence. I think my diagnosis was that BCG represents two new paradigms at once. One is scientific and one is legal, social, economic.
Mhm.
So scientifically, it works in a different way. Every vaccine known to humankind works on the adaptive immune system. This off-target stuff works on the innate immune system.
Yeah.
It's a different scientific paradigm. It's now, getting reified in the literature, but it's frontier stuff. And you think about mRNA, it was resisted for 10, 20 years, and this goes far beyond mRNA, a mere technology. This is a new paradigm.
Mhm.
And then scientifically, I mean, economically and legally, no, Pfizer doesn't own BCG. There's not billions of dollars to be made off of it. The grant structures and the research structures focus on companies and large companies and their capabilities. And so this was just outside of the bio pharma norm.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's, we meaning here the community, which, I would include you at the helm of, and other groups like ours. We all tried our darndest, because the world was at stake and mounted little studies, with small donors, well, the alt pharma people, one of them was funded, by Tito's Vodka. We got more money from them than NIH.
Whatever,
Yeah,
whatever, right?
yeah. And got the studies out and got them out, but it took a little too long, I'd say, to be fair. It came out, the results started coming out 2021, 2022. But had we had just, for the want of a nail, the kingdom was lost, for the want of, I'd say about 10 to 40 million dollars, the world economy was shut down and lost, and this could have made a huge difference. And so now our quest is, me being a human rights lawyer and you being a dogged researcher, we don't give up, and we need to be ready for the next one. And we are ready, in fact, for other diseases right now, that this, broad spectrum, entity can handle.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's really nice about the BCG community is we all talk to one another. So, usually scientists don't talk to one another. They're working on the same compound, same pathway. But in the BCG field, everybody calls everybody up, everybody texts everybody. So, of course, when the panic hit, I got texts and messages and emails immediately from all my BCG friends in Europe and Africa. And they were like, Denise, in the US, you got all these trials going with these people that have diabetes, and they have a huge susceptibility to infectious diseases. So, are you starting your trials immediately to study the BCG effects in them? And of course, we mobilized as fast as we could. And I think we were, I hate using the word lucky, but we were fortunate in this highly infectious disease susceptible community to get people who prior to the vaccines had never had BCG at birth. So it was a very clean cohort. And also, we were really lucky because they had had 3 to 4 vaccines in the 2 to 3 years before COVID hit. So they were absolutely ripe in their randomization to now study the impact of this vaccine on lasting protection from COVID. So we were fortunate to have that previously enrolled population where we now wanted to look at this alternative outcome and get 2 really good positive studies showing the protection of this vaccine. But again, this is in, and I think you have thoughts on this too. This was in an infectious disease susceptible population. This wasn't like going to a hospital and finding nurses. So you want to talk a little bit about the differences in the COVID data based on the population studied? That
Sure, sure. I think um, there are four wonderful studies, randomized controlled trials that have gotten less attention than I think they should have. There was some kind of general impression looking at, retrospective studies, epidemiology, the evidence was mixed about BCG, and it might not have, it's true. I don't think it worked very well for young people, for healthy people, for protection of infection. But when you think about it, the mRNA vaccines, the specific vaccines from J&J, from AstraZeneca, from Pfizer, et cetera, didn't really work so well in preventing infection. What you really want to do is prevent people who are work with people who are susceptible, like you said, meaning they're older or they have comorbidities, other diseases. And you want to look at prevention of severe disease and death. It's like, I think, the most important thing a vaccine or any measure can do. And when you look at the 3 or 4 studies that had, I mean, 2 of yours and one from Greece and one from India that were randomized controlled trials that had all of those criteria, susceptible populations, in fact, multiple doses of BCG and severe COVID as an outcome, the results were very promising. They were designed to be fair with infection as the primary outcome. So that was a weakness. But the secondary outcomes showed marked differences in sorry, your results showed a 92% reduction in COVID infection. Incredible. I mean, better than,
It was the same as Pfizer and Moderna. I mean, it was
yeah, I
great.
mean, it's unbelievable. It's still galling and shocking to me that this potentially world-changing intervention has not gotten more attention. People should have showered money on this from day one, and we could have altered the course of this whole pandemic. And your results proved it. You were right. It's there, it's published. And these other 2 studies too, they showed as secondary outcomes, mind you, but significant 68% reduction, more than 50% reductions in severe COVID. And this is something that the entire world, well, the US needs to get its act together and get it here, but most other countries have it. It's the most used vaccine of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's accessible to everybody. And we would have it at the beginning of a pandemic, even 90 days before.
Yeah.
So, yeah, incredible. And I want to kind of, we could even, if there's a sort of, and these papers were in major journals, Frontiers of Immunology, yours were in Cell. We can kind of put links to these papers, for people to see. The evidence is there. It's just that the business model was not.
Yeah.
And in this
Yeah.
case, I
The
would
business
argue,
model kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
steals the show because now that we're past this COVID pandemic, everybody goes, well, the mRNA vaccines weren't quite as good as we wanted. The virus
yeah,
was smarter. It
yeah.
mutated so fast. The vaccines didn't last so long. But then it's like you want to raise your hand and say, yeah, but BCG still works. It doesn't care if the virus mutates.
It's
And
such an important
that's the
point.
disappointment, right? Of like, why can't we get simplicity and safety out there?
I think it's such an important point. I mean, I think the discourse has to be that in some sense, these broad spectrum off-target vaccines uh, are scientifically superior, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not just that they're cheaper and available faster, but they work better against variants because it's a broad spectrum, right? It's a moat. It's uh, it's like a moat around the castle or a shield. It's not a narrow laser that can be easily available.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's better in those respects. And so it's a mixed bag on terms of some aspects are much better scientifically. I would say maybe some of the specific vaccines, to be fair, might have a higher level of efficacy, although your study showed it was on par,
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps that was because it was multiple doses, et cetera. So
Mm-hmm.
I think those points have to be made that scientifically these are really good. And I would say in terms of the business model argument, people are like, oh, how are you going to make money off of it? Well, all of those other vaccines were publicly funded.
It's true. The
So
manufacturing was from DARPA,
yeah,
Department of Defense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you're going publicly funded, why don't public dollars go to publicly available, open IP, affordable
Mhm.
products? And at the very minimum, do them both. You don't have to skip the others, but at least have room at the
Go in
table for
parallel.
some of these other solutions. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the other disadvantage of BCG is it takes a while for it to kick in to have these off-target effects. So we got to really think ahead for the next pandemic. Because the antigen specific ones, you hope in 2 weeks you're protected, but BCG does take longer, but then lasts years and years and years. So some of our off-target data for other indications show efficacy out to 10 years. So it's kind of like the TB vaccine could still be effective 30, 40 years later.
Yeah, those are
So
given at birth and they have decades of effect. Yeah.
yeah.
And it
So
was interesting to me, this whole innate immunity thing, right? When I try to explain this to, excuse me, to lay people, of which I am one, it's like all humans have two immune systems, and we've all been focusing on the adaptive, but the innate, which is like this shield or this moat, I mean, sometimes it acts within minutes or days. Like when you get a cold,
mhm.
that's your innate immune system kicking in. So there's maybe even some potential for rapid action. I know there's kind of that's still being very much investigated, but it's such an interesting thing. Like the bats, right? Like most species only have innate immunity, and the bats weren't dying of coronavirus. Their innate immune system was tweaked a little bit and dealt with it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, anyways, we have so much work to do. You
Yeah,
have
yeah,
your work to do, and I have my work to do. But
right.
part of the most important thing of what we need to do is we need to advertise a little bit more about using public dollars for public benefit on a broad
Yeah,
basis so the US population, which is my bias, can really get better health care for more affordability, which has been,
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. And I
Even
think
in the US, it's too expensive. And so hopefully we can get better distribution for these off-target effects.
they need to be there. And I
Yeah.
think also, I mean, in the current world, vaccine hesitancy, to use a phrase, is a big issue. And here, one can say two things. One is that these have been taken for decades by billions of people, and there's a long safety track record, and there's not really any IP related profit motive here. This is just science and generic production, basically. And the other is, this is something I've been toying with. I need to kind of consult with the scientific uh, gurus. But if you're working on the innate immune system, it's arguably not a vaccine at all. I think, adaptive immunity is a vaccine, and innate immunity is just enhancement of your overall immunity, and that's what
Yeah,
we're trying to
yeah,
do.
boosting,
Yeah,
boosting.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a lot of work, but it's once in a while I often think for off-target indications we should be calling it BCG immunotherapy. But for prevention of infection, we still have to use the word vaccine. But my opinion is if you don't want it, then you don't get
Yeah,
it.
that's right.
And don't take it
Yeah,
because those who do want it should have the option of having it is
yeah, that
where
seems
I
it
settle.
seems wise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, it's so yeah.
I hope we have more discussions like this, and I hope in this little series of notes from the lab we can have further opinions on advertising the benefit of this generic drug for human benefit.
No, absolutely, and it's a great treat to talk to you, Denise. You're kind of a stalwart of this entire new area, and
Yeah.
your work is rigorous, and you lived in New Orleans, and I did too. So all of that are, all of that
Well,
is
I
great.
have good connections.
Yeah, yeah.
And luckily, I don't have a Bostonian accent. So hopefully, everybody could hear me as well. But thank you so much for your work. Thank you so much for your work in open source pharma as well to get better messaging out to the public. We really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Okay.
Denise.
Okay.
All
Thank
right,
you. Bye.
take care. Bye.